2360 students. So I am just jumping on here to make this video because we are doing Module 4. So we're starting our work in Module 4, Planning for Inclusion. As you can see, it opened today, and it will go through 2 weeks from now. So let's go ahead and jump into what we're doing. So the overview in the Module 4, you're going to have a couple of things you're going to be working on. You will have a discussion board, but you will also have some more case study work. So the overview is really for you to understand what is the family role and how do you prepare an inclusive environment. And remember, we're specifically focusing on early childhood education. So we're going to explore lots of things in Module 4, specifically the critical role that families play, right, in the educational process. What kind of challenges will you encounter, will they encounter? And what will we have to do when we have those challenges, right, when we're looking at assessment and services for those children? So think of your collaboration as a partnership, right? So you're partnering with the families and other teachers. Whenever we're talking about assessment, we've got to talk about the referral process, right? So we're going to look at the referral process and what are IFSPs, which are individualized service, family service plans. And then we look at IEPs, individualized education program. And we're going to determine the services that the child's going to receive and what's the overview essential requirements of each. So that will be a big focus for Module 4. Now, like I mentioned, you have 2 main tasks in addition to your quiz. You will be looking at completing a discussion activity, but you will also be submitting what we call a case study transition plan to the Dropbox, and then you will take Module 4 quiz. As always, you have learning objectives and focusing questions available to you. You have vocabulary terms that you should look at. You're assigned textbook chapters, any linked documents inside the 2-week lessons. All right, so let's go ahead and first look at our objectives. The objectives for you is really defining the role of families in supportive, inclusive early childhood environments. Discuss the impact and disability can have on families. Describe the process when you're referring a child for services. What are the major requirements? So you're going to summarize the major requirements either for the IEP or the IFSP. What are some strategies that helps ease transitions when you have a child with disabilities between different programs and settings? You're going to define the various types of programs and transitions that affect children. What are the physical, social, and temporal aspects of environments and inclusive settings? And then also you're going to identify how universal design for learning principles can enhance access and participation in classrooms where children have disabilities. So all of these module objectives are going to help us meet our course objectives, right? We have some questions down here, some focusing and guiding questions for each lesson. So I have questions listed that will help guide you through your lesson 4.1, and I have questions that will guide you through lesson 4.2. So lesson 4.1 really is focusing on the role of families and the referral process. Lesson 4.2 is really going to help you start to implement those strategies and prepare those environments and supporting transitions for the child and the family. Now, the reading resources. You have your textbook, which is a wonderful resource. You're going to be reading 4 chapters. And you're like, oh my gosh, but you do have 2 weeks to do this. So first, I want to talk about some important things that I want you to focus on when we're talking about Chapter 9. Okay, so Chapter 9 is Partnership with Families. So this book really is going to give you a historical perspective on family involvement, And then it's going to look at the concept of family uniqueness and explain how this concept will affect you and your practices in early childhood classrooms. What is a family-centered practice, and listing those components. Describe the various ways parents and families participate in their child's program. And then 5 or more ways for you to effectively communicate. So really it's all about collaborating with families, chapter 9. But what I did want you to focus on in chapter 9 that I thought was important is that if you look, let me find the page here. I want you to look at page 249 and look at Epstein's framework of 6 types of parent involvement. It will continue on to page 250. Also, I want you to notice that this is really important, this framework, because this is allowing you to see how we collaborate and involve parents. And then also, something else I thought that was really neat is if you look on page 251, there is a sample form for parent observation. This is helpful really because it allows you to see really what we want parents to feel welcome, and we want to have conversations with them. And sometimes conversations cannot take, they cannot just take place on the spot. So this is really going to help you have follow-up conversations with them. And in order to do that, it's helpful for you to take notes and observe the child so you can have those follow-up conversations. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump into chapter 10. So chapter 10 is really important because this is talking all about the assessment process, right? How do we get those services for the child so they can get an IEP or IFSP? So this one's important because it really dives really deep into the assessment process, right? And what it looks like. What are some early indicators for identifying? What are some screenings you can use? What's the family's role in the assessment process? What is the role for you as an educator when we are doing this assessment process so we can get the services, whether it's IEP or IFSP? What are the major requirements of IEPs or IFSPs? And then what if you can't get them services and they can't get a plan? Then we're going to do what we call accommodations through 504. So what is that? So really, I don't want to call out any specific pages because this chapter is really heavy and really important for you to look at. So all of it you should be looking at and reading. Chapter 13 we'll get in next. So chapter 13 is really looking at how should you set your classroom up. And remember, this is an early childhood inclusive environment. So when we're talking about it, we're looking at the social, we're looking at the physical, the temporal. This chapter is really great because it lets you understand the planning process to get a child who has an IEP or IFSP in your room. How do you set this up for the transition process? How do you set this up so they're successful, right? And what I really like about this chapter specifically is that it really lets you think about your own classroom or maybe the one you're working in and reflect on the physical environment. Physical is important. It's not the only important thing because we talk about social and temporal, but we really look at how important the physical environment is, and there's pictures to help us, right, to gauge an idea. So as you're reading this, think about your own classrooms that you work in, right, and how we can start organizing it to be more conducive and accessible for those children, okay? How do you set it up where it works, where you are supporting them, whether it is a physical disability or emotional or social or temporal? Like, how are we diving into these? And the pictures throughout chapter 13 are really good because it's going to give you a snippet into what it should look like, okay? Also, really wanted to note on page 373 is really neat because it gives you indicators of an inclusive. So it's like a list that can be used by parents when looking for a program, right? So this allows you to look, hey, my program should have this. So it's like a checklist for you, even though it goes to parents. So that's really helpful. Another thing that's helpful too is looking at outdoor equipment and the physical environment outdoor, which a lot of us fail to do. So this is important for you to look at as well, right? And if they're and also throughout, take advantage of any time in our chapters that you see video connections, watch those. Those are amazing. Because sometimes you can read, but unless you have a visual and audio go with it, it's not as effective. So make sure that you look at that. Also, anytime they have case studies, make sure that you read those because they're very helpful as well. And lastly, chapter 19, which goes into planning the transition. Now, chapter 19 is really important, and you're going to use this for your assignment, your case study assignment. So that's going to be a good resource for you when you're completing your assignment, which we will go over. Okay, so let's go into 19. Chapter 19 really talks about when you receive that child, how can you make sure that you're supporting them to where it's kind of a more smooth transition to where you're accepting them. Now, whenever you're receiving a child, right, there's two teams in the transition process. There is the sending team and the receiving team. The receiving team would obviously be you in this project work that you're doing because you are getting that case study child, right? So chapter 19 really starts off by talking about the steps in the transition process, which is important for you to know first, which is on page 559, right? So things like, okay, first you have to simulate a planning team, so develop a planning team. Then you have to set goals. You are going to define the roles of the family, define the roles of the sending team and receiving team. You're going to write transition plans and procedures for that child, and then you're going to review, right? We're going to always have to measure if what we're doing is effective. We're going to evaluate what we're doing, okay? So that's the steps in the transition process, and you're going to use this chapter to help you with your assignment. Now, the other things that you should look at that's going to help you with your assignment is on 561, when your assignment starts talking about what are the roles of the sending team, the receiving, and the parents. And you have to include that in the transition document. Read that page, right? Again, when we're talking about the case study project, I want you to look at strategies. On page 573 in chapter 19, it talks about samplings of family and child transition strategies, as well as program level transition planning strategies. This is going to help you because in the project, you're going to have to work on goals and have strategies to implement to help them meet those goals. So that's an important page for you as well. So let's go ahead and get on into the lessons and the assignments. So if you look here underneath what we just went over, you also have your vocabulary terms. I'm not going to click on that. Those are the terms that you're going to see throughout the textbook chapters as well as the lessons. So again, we said that lesson 4.1 is really talking about the role of the family in the assessment process, right? That goes along with your textbook chapters. So specifically, we start out with DEC, Division of Exceptional Children. What are their recommended practices, they say, for families, okay? Then, what are some challenges that families face during this transition process? It talks about the steps of the assessment process when you're trying to get a child referred for special ed. And then, how do we identify and refer them? Then, lesson 4.2 is all about transition and strategies, right? So, 4.2 is really going to help you when you are completing your homework assignment. As well as your case study assignment. So the first thing we start out with in lesson 4.2 is program transitions. Then we go into supporting transitions. Then we see what are some recommended practice for a division of exceptional children. right? Development exceptional children. What are they saying? Specifically the environment itself. And then we get into universal design, right? What are those principles of universal design for learning and how it applies to exceptional children in early childhood? And then in education, how do we use universal design to help us? Now, after you complete lesson 4.1 and 4.2 and you've read your chapters, you are going to complete your module 4 quiz, and then you're going to begin your homework assignments. So let's go ahead first and dive into the discussion activity, and then we'll get into your case study work. Okay, so the discussion activity, again, is going back to that lesson 4.1 and that first chapter you read on chapter 9, which was talking about family collaboration partnerships. So when you're completing this, you may want to think back on that chapter. This activity is really a key way for teachers as yourself to build strong partnerships with families, right? And to gain an understanding of what it's like to raise a child with disability. So this activity has a series of phone interviews with professionals, right, and experienced family members, which are discussing the family professional partnerships. So there are 5 videos here. And what you're going to do is you're going to click on the link that says Family Professional Partnerships, and you're going to scroll down until you see the 5 audio clips which are listed here. You are going to listen to them, and then you're going to download the file titled Discussion Form. And then you're going to identify suggestions for your practice, right? So after you listen to each one inside the form, I want you to list at least 2 suggestions from each audio clip. So for instance, let's say you're listening to Janice Bialka, and she's going to give you 2 suggestions. You're going to put those 2 in what you would like to incorporate into your own practice. And then you are going to do the same for the other 4. And then at the end, you're going to see a section that says reflection. Now remember, this is all going to be in the same document, one document. You're going to complete these questions. And this reflection allows you to really think upon either the centers that you're working in or your own classroom, and thinking about how you can gain a deeper understanding and perspectives, and what insights did you gain. So through these questions and answering these questions, that's going to help you reflect upon that. And then remember, you're going to post the form inside of the discussion board. And then that is going to allow you to respond to 2 other people, okay? That is going to be the assignment for the discussion. Now, let's get into your case study work. Your case study work is where you're going to use that case study child that you use for your disability PowerPoint. You are going to prepare a transition plan for that disability child that you picked for your case study. Same child, do not pick someone different. So for this assignment, you're going to focus on a child's transition plan from one program to another. Remember, the term transition refers to the process of period where one's changing from one program to another. Your role is going to be part of the transition planning team. Now, how are you going to complete the form? Here's what you're going to do, listing directly as put in the following steps. The first step is you have to identify the transition planning team. Okay, so you're going to list who the members are in the transition planning team. Okay, don't just list someone from the old program. Instead, think about the receiving program, right? And then you're going to put what their role is. Now, these individuals have valuable insights, okay? Remember, this is not the same people that are going to be in the IEP team, so just make sure you make note of that. And go back and refer to not only the lessons, but I want you to go back and look in your textbook chapter, because that whole chapter I said that was really important is going to be talking about these things. The second thing you're going to do is you're going to develop goals. These goals are going to help make sure the transition process goes smoothly and we can kind of identify any potential challenges. Okay, so challenges, I'm talking about things like transportation for the child, program hours, the class size, maybe the receiving team doesn't have enough staff who are experienced with this kind of disability the child has, right? So you're going to come up with goals, and the goals that you come up with should focus on the child, the family, and both the sending and receiving programs. Now remember, these are not like the objectives in IEP or IFSP. These goals are related to your case study child, and they should be realistic and achievable and should be measurable, and you should be able to achieve them within 2 months of having that child, right? The third part, you're going to clarify roles of the sending program, family, and receiving program, okay? So you're going to answer questions that clarify the role in the transition process, and they are inside the form. And then the last thing you're going to do before you do a follow-up is put those support transition goals, okay? So you're going to design activities to support the transition goals. You should include at least 2 sets of activities, okay? So what I mean by that is before the child comes to the new program, you're going to prepare activities to help that child be more comfortable and prepare for you to receive them. So it's going to help the child, the family, and the staff. Then you should have to include goals for when the child gets to the new program. How are you going to continue to support that child when they come to you, right? So keep in mind that these goals and these strategies are supporting the child, the family, the staff. You're keeping in mind all of those things. And remember, that information about your child is in the case study that you were given, that you chose. Those things are going to be things you use to help you with this assignment. Now, lastly, you have to follow up and do an evaluation procedure. How do you know that what you've done and is successful, meaning are the goals being met? Okay, so once the transition has taken place, now you have to do a follow-up. Check in with the family, the program staff, assess the success of the transition. Did you meet your goals? Do you need to make adjustments? Okay, remember, this assignment is really focusing on the transition process itself, not the child's individual goals. So we're not looking at their IEP progress or their IFSP. We're looking at the transition to support that child. Remember, the success of a transition is measured by the relationships with the family, right? And how we support them through this process. You will submit this form to the Dropbox that's labeled transition plan, okay? Now I have the rubric here that tells you exactly how you're going to be graded, and if you met expectations, you did not, the key elements I want, and then if you exceeded expectations. And one thing I wanted to make note of is if you want to receive exceeds expectations, you need to have this plus this. So both these 2 columns have to be met to get the highest grade. Now, I did provide you with some transition terms that's going to help you. You will also notice those in your lessons and in your chapters, but they're there for you. And here's the planning form. I want to open it and show you what it looks like. It'll go into downloads. It'll take a minute to load. This is what I've been explaining to you. You're going to put your case study child's name down there, the transition that's occurring. Now you're like, what transition's occurring? Go back to the case study child. Find where they're being sent to. Where are they now? That's what you're looking for. So if they're going from mommy day out into a regular school, if they're going into a preschool, are they going into kindergarten? Are they going into pre-kindergarten? That's the transition occurring. That's on the child's case study that you have. Now, identifying the planning team. That's the first thing I said you had to do. This is also in chapter 9 in your textbook, where we list the essential members and what role. So what do they bring to the team? The second thing is you're going to come up with those 3 goals for the child. Now remember, these are broad goals. You have to have at least 3. Remember, they have to be goals to meet some possible challenges. You're thinking, what are the challenges the child has? Again, it's in your case study. Go to the case study and look at the challenges the child has, right? What are some challenges that that child would have in this transition process? Remember, the goals should be broad enough to cover the child, the family, and the staff, either receiving and sending. Then, after you do that, you are going to answer these questions, right? You're going to give a brief response, 1 to 2 sentences, answering this question. What role does the sending program have in this transition? What role does the parent's family have in the transition? What role does the receiving family have in the transition? And again, all of this is in your textbook chapters. Now that we have listed the members of the planning team, what role, like what do they bring to the table, we went ahead and set 3 goals for the child. We know what roles they serve. Now we have to plan some activities. These activities are to kind of get the child used to being in the program. Now remember, you have to set up activities before the child comes to you and after the child comes to you, okay? So let's look first at before the child starts the new program. What are 3 activities you would have the child do? Now, where it says number goal it supports, again, that's coming from this. What were your transition goals? You're going to put which goal it relates to. And then description. What is the activity that you're going to do? Now remember, use your book. It's very helpful. Your chapter we went over in there has transition activities and strategies for you. You might want to look at those to kind of help you, but remember, it has to be related to your goals and it has to be able to support your actual case study child. And then who's going to be responsible? Is it a staff member? Is it a parent? The teacher? Who is going to help make sure these goals get done and these activities? Who's in charge of these activities? So let me give you an example that might help you. If we're talking about a goal before the child comes, okay, so let's say one of the goals is the child has trouble with peers, right? So maybe they don't work well with others, they're very independent. So one of my goals would be social supports, right? Possible challenge, the child does not like being around others or hits them. Let's just pretend that's her goal. Here, one of the transition activity would be to have the child have play dates, right? They could set up a play date with one child or even just come in the classroom to meet the child. This would support that goal of social supports. What exactly are you going to do? Plan out the activity. Okay, I'm not saying to write a paragraph, but I want to get a clear idea of how that activity will go and then who would be responsible. Okay? Maybe one of them is the child has trouble with transitions, right? They don't like to be away from mom and dad. Well, one of your transition activity could be meet the parent, meet the school night, or a parent or a classroom tour, right? So those are just things to think about. Then I want you to come up with 3 goals that you would be implementing once the child actually starts your program, right? So how would you support them? And what goal supports? Explain the activity and responsible. Now, the follow-up I told you about is your reflection, right? It's the final step. This is where I want you to go back to your textbook. Go back to the second lesson in our module. Look at the steps of the transition process. Think about how you would determine if the goals are met. So how do you actually follow up and evaluate on a transition? That's in your textbook. It lists the procedure for transition evaluations and how you follow up with parents. What would you do when you're following up with staff, when you're following up with the sending team? You know, how are we communicating, collaborating? How do we know that we met all our goals? How are we evaluating? Are we using anecdotal notes, anecdotal records, right? Are we using a checklist? These things are important. You're going to talk about that in your follow-up planning process. All right, and again, like I said, that's what you will be submitting to Dropbox. So if you go to assessment and you hit Dropbox, you will scroll down until you see transition plan. Now remember, it's due March 9th. You have 2 weeks to complete all of Module 4. Remember, you do have to do case study work, and you will also be responsible for that discussion I talked about, okay? So the discussion will be labeled Module 4, where it says Parents Speak Out. And this is where you will submit that form, okay, of the audio connect. And then those interviews, and then you will reply to at least 2 people. All right, that pretty much takes care of Module 4. I hope you guys have a great couple of weeks. I am going to be doing a video on parts 3 and 4 of the Inclusive Practices Fieldwork. So that will be coming out this week. So please take note of that. That I will email you once I have uploaded that video. And I do want you to watch it because it breaks down all the parts. And I've already completed parts 1 and 2. But now we're going to be going over parts 3 and 4, and I want you to continue working on your inclusive practices fieldwork this entire semester. As always, please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Until next time, take care.